Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Up is Not the Only Way, hosted by HRDQU and presented by Dr. Beverly Kay. My name is Sarah and I'll moderate the webinar. It will be about an hour, and if you have any questions, you can always type them into the questions box. We'll be answering these questions as they come in live at the end of the presentation. So welcome, Bev, and thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, and I am coming to you all from LA, Southern California, where the temp today is in the upper 80s, but we were just sharing with Sarah that yesterday it was 102. So happily I'm inside, not outside. And I want to welcome all of you. I think I know a lot of you. I looked at the list of people coming. I recognized a lot of familiar names. And let me just say a word or two about this topic and why I think it's so important right now. And, you know, the idea of people finding their career satisfaction in other ways than the vertical move, I think is critical. And just in the last couple of weeks, I was looking through some books on my shelf to say, well, why is this so critical now? And one of the books that jumped out at me was Flourish by Martin Seligman. And in it he talks about what is the meaning of well-being. And he said it's about having a feeling of engagement, having meaning in your work, feeling like you're achieving. And to me, all of that spoke a lot to how important it is to have options for myself for my career. A little statistic from Deloitte said that 87% of individuals out there are not passionate about their jobs, their work, their career, and that really scared me. And Josh Bersin, in all of his great work, keeps talking about the irresistible organization is able to give meaningful work and growth opportunities. And if growth opportunities are not all as available as we want them to be or they once were, then we better think of other ways to rethink the different mobility options that we have. So I thought one way I'd start to be a little different is to ask you to pull out a sheet of paper, and I'm going to ask you 5 questions. I just want you to jot down your answers to these 5 questions one at a time, and I'll tell you why I asked it, because I want to give you a feel for the whole of career development before I bump immediately into just the mobility part. And the first question is, what is buried in your DNA, your career DNA, so much so that you can't not do it? What is it that you take with you from job to job? And the reason I ask that is that it is really important in the world of career to think carefully about what you bring to the table, what you offer, what your skills are, what your interests are, what your values are. And the more self-aware you are, the more you're ready to think about the career choices ahead of you. Second question. If your colleagues asked you to join a tough problem-solving task force, and they chose you, why do you think they chose you? And the why do you think has everything to do, if you just jot that down for a sec, has everything to do with being brand aware. And what is it about your reputation that draws your colleagues to want you to help solve a problem? Are you aware of your brand, your reputation in the organization? And that's the second critical step. The third question I'd ask you that will show you a third step in a moment is, what is one disruption that you feel is going to affect your organization in the next maybe year? One disruption. And the reason I ask that is that I think that any level, anyone who's thinking about their career has to be trend aware. And that means what's changing How will it disrupt my career? How will it grow my career? What signals is it giving for how I need to be more career aware in the future? The fourth question I want to ask is, what is one experience that if you added it to your repertoire, it would really get you ready for many others in the future? And that's what I call mobility aware. And that's what we're going to spend a lot of time talking about on this webinar. But it's, what are my choices, plural? What are my options? And then finally, the last question would be, and I'd love you to think about this, is what's one area I better learn personally, or my own career is going to be disrupted by change? And maybe that means, how do I get more resource aware? And that means, how do I think about what I have to learn, where I have to go to learn it, where in the organization can I learn it? And the tough thing about these 5 all equally compelling pieces is that usually where the individual goes immediately is to, what's next for me, being mobility aware. And that's a tough place to start if you don't do the other pieces of pre-work beforehand. So that's a model that I believe in my organization has delivered for several decades. And now we're focusing in on that mobility issue. We didn't want you to think that you go there immediately. And so what about the role of the manager in these 5 areas of compelling careers? I think around self-awareness, the best career coaches, the best managers, really do have an active curiosity. They ask questions. They don't assume. They help the individual say more about who they are, what they're good at, what they want, etc. in their careers. I think the second thing that good managers, good coaches, people who want to help in that career puzzle is to provide straight talk. And I think for managers, it means not just from you, it means, who else could you say to your people, I think you ought to collect data from these people in your career constellation, in your career network, in your career audience, and see how they see your brand. And I think that's really critical. And then around being trend aware, I think the savvy leader, the savvy manager, has to have a future focus. And that future focus is like days from now, weeks from now, maybe year or so from now. But what is it? What are the trends? What is the future saying to my people that they better learn in order to stay up to speed? And then on mobility aware, it's, so what are the options? I think the savvy manager can think about, if not promotion, then what else is there? And what I really want you to hear, managers in the audience, people who work with managers, is that promotion is only one way to promote an employee's career. I think now there are many more options. And then finally, around resource aware, I think managers, coaches who work with people around careers have to be referral rich. That means you don't have to have all the answers yourself, but you have to be able to say, here's where I'd go if I wanted to get that information. So those are the things that I think are critical. When you look at that screen, think about, where do managers in my organization really fall short? Where would I give managers an A? Where would I give them a D, or an F or a C minus? And it's those areas that I think we have to build as people in the human capital arena for managers in our organizations. So my aim with you for today is to talk about the business case, to introduce to you a notion we call the Kaleidoscope Career, and I'm going to elaborate on that, to talk about the importance of building experience portfolios of a variety of experiences that together ready me for the future. And then finally, the owner shift that has to happen to move individuals, managers, and their organizations into the next step. So let me start with the business case, and let me, as I put these up, I'm going to ask you to join in the chat and say, here's what I hear mostly when we say to organizations that we're consulting to. So why now? Why is this so important? And what we hear is, number one, it's about attracting and retaining a world-class team. It's your employee value proposition. It's how do you gain that? How do you keep people interested in coming to work for you? And it has to do with, do you have or do you not have a development culture? I think it's all about increasing workforce capability. It's continuing to build on people's abilities and competencies so that we're ready for the future. I think it's about strengthening resiliency. And as you hear me talk about these, I'd love you to add to the chat box anything that you haven't seen yet. And a question. And then I think resiliency, meaning as I see something stopping in what I've done, something slowing down, how do I look around for what's next for me? What's the next skill I have to own that's going to be mine? I think it's about stimulating the employee voice power. I think we have to get employees to begin to say, here's what I want, here's what I have to do, and not waiting for the answer to come to them from their manager. And then finally, I think it's a huge recognition of the flattened organization. So let me ask you out there in the audience, add to the chat box, what is a business case in your organization? Why did you sign up for this? Why are you here? Why is the issue of career mobility now showing itself in your organization? And I'm watching some comments come on, and I see from Susan, you said, I want to foster a learning culture in my organization. And I think that's a great answer. And it is a learning culture that is really needed. And then there's another Susan who says to stimulate employee voice power. And if you're, I think that's true. I think employees wait to be tapped still. Maybe not so much for millennials, but they too are waiting for the answer to come. And Mike, I love that you said it's because of high turnover. I think that's a very big reason. And, you know, it's one of the major reasons people leave organizations is I don't see the opportunities ahead of me. And Cheryl, I love that you said it's to support org change and empower people to accept the change. I think career development goes hand in hand with that. Laura and Deborah, your suggestions are great too. I think it is low engagement, Letitia, that you just mentioned, and the disengaged workforce. So knowing the business case in your own organization is really critical. And I think it leads us to then why bother with this issue of mobility? Why even care about it? And I'd give you 5 quick answers based on our research that led to the writing of this book. One is that UP never really worked for everyone. And I could see you out there, you know, nodding your heads. It never worked. It never was available. So why not call it as it is? And I think we need to say that loud and clear, that there are other options, and make sure those other options are available in our organization. I think also that career mobility impacts the bottom line. Someone in the last chat that I asked for talked about the connect between career mobility and the organization's ability to make its goals, to meet its strategies. And I think the loss of talent is a huge cost in organizations. And if, in fact, we can show people that there are ways for them to get career satisfaction in other ways than UP, I think we'll have a chance to retain them, and one of you already mentioned how important the retention factor was. The third would be, for me, and you also mentioned that as you looked at the business case, the rapidly changing workplace. We have never been in a VUCA world, a volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous world like we are now. And I love Bob Johansson's comment that says the bad news is it's only going to get worse. The good news is now you know, what are you going to do about it? So the organizations that I'm impressed with are really educating their people about what those rapid changes really look like. And then I think another really important reason is that the manager-employee, the covenant is more important than ever. And yes, I think people are still saying, I don't leave my my organization as much as I sometimes want to leave my manager, who's not showing me that I'm valuable, who's not letting me know that they care. So again, we're seeing how important that the manager connect is. And when I look at research on that, I think the word that pops up for me around that covenant is empathy. And it's a word that Tom Friedman talked about in his latest book, Thank You for Being Late, where he talks about STEMpathy. And people in the STEM functions really forget that they need empathy in order to make those areas, to be known in those areas. Absolutely. And then lastly, development drives engagement, and some of you said that when you talked about the business case. It does. If I feel I'm growing, it really does spark my own ability to be engaged and to care about what I'm doing right now currently. So let me ask you another question. If this is why bother, and we talked about the business case, what gets in the way of career mobility? And of course, these are the right thing to do. What gets in the way? And I'm going to give you 5 possibilities, and I'd like you to do a poll. I'm going to ask to put up the poll, and I want to know if any of these mostly get in the way of your organization. And is it talent hoarding? Is it that managers say, why would I want to let my talent go? I need them to make my goals and meet the tasks that I have to meet. So I'm not letting my talent go. I think the second reason is the philosophy of, yes, mobility is important. It's not broadcast widely enough for everybody. I think the third one is biased perceptions. I think the feeling on the part of employees that, in fact, this lateral move stuff is just to get me to not be so upset about the lack of vertical that I want, etc. And I think a big one that I'm seeing is the systems and process, the disconnect, that we're not supporting other ways of moving in the organization. And finally, it's for the individual, it's I have so much to do right now that I can't make time for looking at other mobility options. So let's run that poll and just see which is the biggest, and then add, I see it beginning to come in, and then add anything else to the chat that you'd say that's what gets in the way. And Deborah, I see you said, what does VUCA stand for? It's volatile, it's a U, uncertain, chaotic, and ambiguous. And it's a word that's been out there for a while, and boy, is that our world now. So when I look at the poll, and I think we've got it, the winner is biased perceptions. And if any of you want to chat and elaborate a little bit on why you said that, do. But I think that both the individual has biased perceptions, I think leaders have biased perceptions, I think our career audience has biased perceptions. And Deborah, you're asking again? No. What VUCA stood for? No, sorry. And I think the second most important one that you just said were process and systems disconnect. And that makes total sense because we need to support that. And then your comments on this, and I love Margaret said in a union environment, job descriptions don't allow for added responsibility. And our required jobs are changing. So people get comfortable in their current jobs and roles, and they don't make bold moves. That is an understatement. You're right. And I think absolutely in union environments that's so. And maybe it is only going to be possible in the not too distant future to change that mindset. So you're right, these are some of the things that get in the way, and how we get around them is going to be up to our own organization and us to figure out, and we've got to figure it out quickly. So what's new, or maybe not so new, but what's out there now, what's being trumpeted loud and clear, is that upward linear moves are disappearing, and they're unlikely to return. And most likely, new management layers are not being added. And with the sad thing is that title progression is still linked to career satisfaction. And it goes against what's going on. And so we need to begin to rethink titles. And I think we need to move from asking people, what do you want to be, to what do you want to do? Because the answer to the what do you want to be makes me give you a title. And maybe we have to change when we ask kids that. It's got to be changed too. So let's look at some reframing that has to go on in order to build more mobility. And one kind of reframing is we have to move from a promotion culture, I really think, to a growth culture, where growth means many things other than just what's my next step up, what's that next title. I think we have to move, and I'm going to talk about this more later, from paths to patterns. Maybe a path is constricting. Maybe a path makes me lead down and punch the ticket on certain things I have to do, whereas changing career patterns, and that's where I'm going to talk about that kaleidoscope image, gives me a lot more choices. And then I think we have to move from thinking about career advancement, maybe, and this is a play on words, I admit, to thinking about career enhancement. And I think we enhance our careers in many, many ways, maybe every single day, than just that upward move. And maybe, bottom line, it's about, instead of saying I've got to move onward and upward, it's I've got to move forward and toward, and that opens up many, many more possibilities. So I think the punchline maybe to this is moving from a telescope viewpoint, meaning there's one job, there's one thing I'm going after, there's one point that I'm zeroing in on, to more of a kaleidoscope, where there's opportunities, there's patterns, and a tiny twist of the kaleidoscope opens up whole new vistas for me. So I want you to see if you can imagine yourselves looking through a kaleidoscope, twisting it slightly, and seeing a whole new pattern emerge. And I think that's the new way we have to look at career patterns, and how a small shift can give us a whole new way of presenting ourselves in the organization. And so I think it's time maybe for us to rewire the paradigm. And you know the old paradigm that all of us grew up with that said you've got to have, and it's still out there, the right person in the right place at the right time. I want to show you some other right places so that the paradigm can shift from right person, right place, right time to maybe more right places, which will give us more right times for more right people. And I think that's a huge shift, and it says it in the least amount of words, and it's just reordering that original paradigm that so many of us have grown up with. So maybe the punchline to this is that multiple experiences will create new patterns, and multiple experiences I believe, mean moving away from job security to employability security, that I can be employable here in a number of ways, and I can be employable other places as well. I think it's thinking about how do I scale experiences? How do I, as a leader, how do I enable employees to bring their talents to work and give them new experiences to use those talents? I think that's going to be critical in all ways. So I want to provide for you a way to think about some of these alternative moves. And then I'm going to open it up to some more questions. So I want to show you the different ways that I think people can build that portfolio. And here are 6 ways to think. And know that vertical is only one of them, lateral is only one of them. There are others. And maybe a lower risk but high payoff is the first one, is growing right where you are. And maybe that is low risk because it doesn't mean you change, but it means you add something new to your repertoire that prepares you to do better at what you're doing now and to do better at the future, for sure. I think the idea of experimenting, short-term, quick experiments, we call it try before you buy, is another low-risk, high-payoff option that we need to think about, and that is, how can I put my toe in the water? I think a huge option is lateral. And, you know, there's an idea out there that we're going to move from linearity in careers to laterality. I can barely say the word. And I think that we're seeing more and more organizations opening up project teams and opening up lateral moves and seeing those lateral moves as promotions. And I think that's critical. And then there are some other ones that are maybe a little bit harder to deal with, to deliver on, but important. One is step back for a reason or a season. And I'll say more about that in a minute. I think it's a hard one. I read a quote from Josh Bersin that said that about 87% of people say you can't have a life, a balanced life, and work in an organization. I think right there is one reason for stepping back, but there are lots of others, and I think it's going to come to be truer in organizations. And I think we have to consider, when up is the only way for an individual, how do we talk with them smartly about the risks and the rewards that come with promotions? And then finally, one option always is to move out, and the question is that grass really greener? And so we'll talk about that too. So there are 6 options. When you look at those, just imagine in your heads, where would you give your organizations an A? Yeah, we really think about that. Or an F. No, we have never thought about that. And we don't even talk about it here. And in some of your comments, I began to see some of that when you have a hierarchical mentality, as someone said, you can't think about these other options, and that's very true. So I think one thing that we want to have is more kind of people who can coach us about experiences. I think we want opportunities for serial learners. I think we want to publicize more the learning opportunities that are out there. And we want to, it's a way to increase learning agility, is to increase the kind of experiences and learning that we can have out there in the world. And I think that's critical. So maybe the new kind of CEO is a chief experience officer who really is maybe a learning experience architect. What are the different learning experiences I can put out there for people? So I want to talk to you about the 6 different moves and get you to think about them also for yourself. So the first one is grow here, that we talked about. And grow here, it's a hard one to talk about with an employee. So I want to give you one of many ways of talking about it. And I'd say one of the most effective I've seen is something I've always called, and we've called, career calisthenics, and that is 4 things you can do. And I want you to think about this for yourselves and think about it for managers you have to train and for managers you work with and for your own employees. And one is reach up. Imagine a manager really saying to an individual, what is there I'm doing that you think you could do all of or part of? And let's really talk about that, because, boy, I'd like to give that to you, and I'd love you to be able to do it. Tell me what it is you're interested in. I think another kind of career calisthenic is reach down. I think it's the question to every single employee. So what can you teach, train, tutor, mentor someone else to do? I don't think we ask that enough in the organization. I don't think we set people off to think about the ROI they get from mentoring somebody else. I think the reach out is getting more and more important, and that means outside your own area, outside of our function. Who would you like to learn from? Who would you like to shadow? Who would you like to know more about what they do and why they do it? And maybe it's outside of your function, but in the organization. Maybe it's colleagues in other organizations that are doing something that you've always been interested in. And then finally, how do you reach to the side? How do you reach to a colleague to say, I'd like to know more about what you do? So all of those are ways that I think we can talk to people about growing here. So I'd love you to think about this for your own careers, and I'd love you to let me know if you have some quick ideas. And you can put some in the chat box. And my question to you would be, so what do you want to learn? And how would you learn it on the current job? So that's one of the options. The second option that I want to talk about, and I want to open a chat box on this one, is I want to raise your antennae to thinking about this try before you buy, or investigating possibilities, or experimenting. And what I want to remind you of is that these options are elastic experiences. They can be really small, or they can be larger. They can be small and significant, meaning I could just interview some people and find out, what it is they're doing and why they're doing it, and ask some real curious questions. I could do something medium and take something for maybe a short period of time and see whether or not I like it. A lot of organizations are making more and more job boards available and offering people medium and meaningful experiences, and sometimes it's big and bold, and it means actually testing something for a substantial period of time. So here's what I'd love to know from you, and I'd love to know it about your own careers. I'd love to know one area that you'd like to explore. So as you fill that in, I'm going to look at your questions. And I see a question from Melody, and she says, would calisthenics be relatively short-term, months or longer, for best results? And going back to calisthenics, yes, you're right. I would say it depends. I think we have to think short-term while we think medium-term. Talk about this slide, and something larger. And I don't think enough of us say, well, what can I go try for a day? What can I go experiment with for a day? So I'd love to know from you, what are some areas that you'd like to explore around your own careers? And I know the majority of this audience is in the human capital field, and so I'm seeing you, you give me some of the things you want to experiment with. 3 of you want to experiment in the world of recruiting. 1 of you wants to move into the world of OD and see what that's really like. Interesting. 4 of you want to experiment with the world of sales. And a number of you are just saying, I want to do something meaningful. And Deborah, you said maybe learn a little bit more about the development side of software. I think that's critical. It's stating those things. Here's what I want to learn. Here's what I want to go after. And saying that to your manager, saying it to your colleagues, that makes those experiments begin to really happen. So great thinking on your parts. Love it. And because I think we need to think about ourselves in order to help us think more meaningfully about others. So the next move I called sideways to highways. And here's what I'd like to know, because it's one of the most important ways that organizations are experimenting with. And in fact, there's a stat out there from Mercer that 67% of organizations are trying to experiment with more laterals. So what I'd like to know from you here is, when you've made a lateral, how has it benefited you? And if you put that into the chat box, like my hunch is many of you have made laterals, or when you look back you'd say, yep, that was a lateral. And I wonder how you benefited, what you learned from them. And I'd like to see you put some things up in the chat box. And I see someone already saying that Julie, I think that's wonderful. You found your lifetime calling by experimenting with a lateral. You tried something that you didn't think would be a lifetime calling, and wow, it turned into that. Cheryl, you're saying increased corporate knowledge. Felicity is saying increased corporate knowledge. Hard for me to read and talk at the same time. And some of you are saying, I saw my organization from different angles. And 2 of you said something like that. I think that moving sideways can give you a whole new view. So maybe to sum this up, here's a bunch of things that we found in our research that you've also mentioned. I think I'm going to add found my calling to one of these things for the person who said that. And it is more exposure. And the more leaders who know me, the more possibilities there are. It is about knowledge of another function, even if I step my toe into that function for a couple of days or a short period of time. I think it's expanding the network, and I think it's opening up more opportunities. It's always a risk when you say, yes, I'm going to take that lateral, leave where I am now, but I think the rewards lately we're seeing are overtaking the risks. So I think that's an important move for you to consider for yourselves and help your people really think about. So what about yet another move? And this would be, and I've got an interesting thought question for you on this. It's one I call step back for a reason or a season. And it is the idea of saying, I want to go back to something I did in the past. Maybe because the current thing is just not, it's not the fit that I thought it was. I mean, how many of us know technical people who move into management and say, ew, I never thought this meant so much dealing with people. I don't even like people. And they have a hard time saying, I made a mistake. And what happens is they go on to other organizations instead. And that's a shame. I think stepping back for a reason or a season is brave to admit this was not a fit. And I think it's very future focused. There's a better future for me elsewhere in the organization, and if stepping back for a bit will get me there, then I'm willing to. So what I want you to think about as people in the whole human capital field is to think about the idea of refocusing. And maybe in an organization where up is not the only way, this is going to become a more viable option than ever before. And let's be honest. Think about yourselves. Think, do you label steps down or back as demotions? Is that the label you put on it? Is that the label others in the organization puts on it? Do you believe choosing to refocus will knock you, just think about it for yourself, or an employee permanently off track? And do you assume that these kind of refocusing experiences are only for those who can't cut it? In other words, are you biased? Is it time for you to step off the treadmill for personal reasons? And can you, stand up to those who say, well, she's going backwards instead of forwards? I don't think stepping back is going backwards at all. I think if we choose it, it's moving forwards in a whole new and unique way. And I think that's critical. So think about that as another option that maybe might not appear to be one of them, but I think more and more as we look at the stalemate in moving up, that is going to become an option. So two more before I begin to wrap up, and one is, when is up the way? How do you know when it's the right way to go? And so I have a couple questions I want to put up. I want to say, number one, the rungs are all gone, up is still there. And I want us to begin to ask people better questions when they say, it's promotion, promotion, promotion. I think we have to ask them what the change will mean for them. I think we have to ask them what challenges they will face. I think we have to ask them, and what I want to ask you to put up on the chat box is, for your next move up, what challenges will you face? I'd like you to put some of that in the chat box. And because I think it's a very important question that we don't ask enough of people who say, this is the move that I want. And I'm beginning to see some answers appear. You're a great chatty audience, and I thank you for that. And someone said, several of you said, something to the work-life balance issue, and as a challenge, that as you move up. Someone said the challenge would be the new environment and culture. Someone said managing a large number of people, managing a departmental budget. Letitia, you said relocation, change in the organization culture. And I think that a lot of you have great ideas for what challenges you'd face. Deborah said a very strong one that others agreed with, and I can see on the chat that it's about embracing change is going to be a challenge. And boy, it is. Someone else said it's losing peers I work with now. Someone else said it's managing peers that I work with now as a peer. So all of those are challenges. And I think they're important questions that when people want to move up, we don't ask enough. I think two more are the question, what do you need to learn to feel confident? And for all of you who answered in the chat box, I'd ask you that as the next question. And what do you need, what do you most look forward to about that upward experience, and what do you least look forward to? It's something like the one I just asked you, but it's asking it in a different way, and I think the more we ask these questions, the more we'll get that variety of responses from people, and it will lead us into great conversations, because I think we choose up for many other reasons, and we don't always think that through. So the last move to think about, I think, is one we have to face too, and that is the move to choose to leave. And I call that one, is the grass really greener? And I think that one is about moving out. And what I'm seeing is a big change in organizations from really talking to people about their desire just to move out. And I'll tell you something, when I meet with organizations, what I hear a lot that I have never heard is, we want to prepare you for employability, if not here, elsewhere. And we really want to support your movement. And again, I don't hear it from every organization, but a lot of the forward-thinking organizations who say, I'm not going to have my people forever, are saying, we support you in your employability, and we don't expect you to stay here forever. And I think that's critical. And I think the more elegant the exit, the more we say, good luck with that, and let us know if it doesn't work, because we want you to come back, which leads to the second part of moving out, which is that respectful return. More than ever, we are seeing people come back to organizations. when they know that the door is open for them to come back. I think it's happening a lot in high-tech organizations where I think the grass is greener, and I find out it's not. So for those of you who, for whom this one makes you the most nervous, I'd say at the 11th hour, here are some things to ask about. And one is that you can talk about is, what's the equity I've built? What is the real financial equity? And I just don't mean how much have you put away, but I mean, what is it you're getting from this organization? Totally, that you haven't really thought about when you think about moving for another financial opportunity. And then, how have I learned to influence people? How have I learned to negotiate this organization? And how long will it take me to learn that elsewhere? And we don't realize how long that took us and how long it's going to take elsewhere. Maybe it's also relationship equity, and that is I've built up a cadre of pals and peers who I turn to help me every step of the way in this organization. And those relationships took me a while to build, and they'll be critical for me wherever I go, and they'll take me a while to build. And then my skill equity. So I've been a great contributor to our marketing department here. I know a lot of the ins and outs. Even though I want to think about moving somewhere in my specialty in marketing, I know they're going to want me to deploy my skills in different ways, and am I ready for that? So I think sometimes chatting with people about these forms of job equity is equally important to talking about the why of their leaving and letting them know the welcome mat is out for them to come back. I love the notion of the key is under the mat, you know, and for a while it never was. So I want to begin to close down and give you some ideas on what you have to do to make this shift. And I'm calling the shift, instead of ownership, which we've used so much, I think we really have to stop talking about the nebulous ownership and maybe talk about the actual shifts that we have to make. And I think there's three key stakeholders in this arena that we have to make some shifts around. And I think one is absolutely the manager, who has to provide support and guidance. I think managers, we have to get managers to ask about people's career intentions, no matter how scary asking about that is, and people's career ambitions. We have to understand those important touch points for people, and we have to be able to hang on to the memory of those as the person works with us and for us, and because the more transparent we can be about other opportunities for those people, as well as opportunities in your own arena, I think is critical. I think it's also critical, managers, to tell your own story about your own ups and downs. And for employees, I think it's very important, the words energy, drive, goals, commitment. It is a shift that you have to own and take on. And maybe the question is, how can I own it more? How can I really shift the way I proact in the organization? How can I volunteer for more? How can I ask for other opportunities? How can I learn more about the organization's strategy? How can I negotiate for a better career fit for myself? And I think for the organization, it's also key, and many of you may fall into that in your HR roles, in your human capital roles, in your training roles. And I think more and more it's about what are the resources and the processes and the access that we give people. Are we really promoting non-hierarchical leadership? Or are we saying up is not the only way, but the only leadership that we support is hierarchical leadership? I think we have to more and more open channels for maximum agility and build the systems and processes that support career opportunities. And I think we have to reward managers for letting people go to grow instead of hoarding talent. And how do we build processes that, in fact, incent managers to let their people go. And there are a lot of organizations doing some exciting things in that arena. And maybe we have to even change at an organization level. Maybe we have to begin to pay more attention to paying for multiple skills instead of just a shift in job title. So I think it requires some new optics, some new ways of looking at what's possible. And some of those new optics include appreciating patterns, maybe, instead of paths, where a path maybe offers a singular next step or several maneuvers on that path. A pattern says there are multiple ways to proceed, and patterns change as individuals' needs and desires change. And again, a twist or turn of that kaleidoscope gives me a whole new pattern. And I think one thing that we came up with, and it came from an interviews we did, was we have to encourage optionality. I remember interviewing one particular individual who said she always has an A plan, a B plan, and a C plan. And she used the word optionality, and she said it allows her to take more risks because she knows if one thing doesn't work, she can move in other directions. And for leaders out there, I think it's about widening the net of talent. And I think too often when we go into organizations, we're asked to work with high pose, a subset of the organization, people who are leader wannabes and leaders who want to move up the chain of command. And I think we have to look at high pros as well, high professionals who say, no, moving up is not what I really want, but boy, I really want to grow and I really want to change. And I think we're not giving them enough attention. I think we give them short shrift. I think we need to help individuals balance meaning and money. I think we've learned that there are many people who throw their energy into work that isn't paying big bucks. They probably earn enough to cover their rent or the mortgage and some dinners out, but they wouldn't give up their roles of helping, serving, teaching, learning. And I think we've seen that a lot from millennials who are saying it's meaning that's even more important than money for me. I think I've even seen some statistics that say I'd rather give up some money if I could have more control over what I do every day. And yet the dollars count. How do we make that balance happen? How do we talk about it more openly? And then an intriguing one for me is how do we let go of the boxes on the org chart and think more about maybe orb charts where we orbit around other groups, we orbit around other projects, and we learn from everything that we're doing instead of having to totally make a significant move from one box into another. I think there's more project-based work that enables more cross-functional relationships. I think the org chart of the future might be more, instead of an organization chart, an orbitization chart, where I choose people that I want to learn from, and I orbit around them and learn from them, and then move it on to the next thing I do. So maybe it really is about activating kaleidoscope careers, careers where there are multiple patterns and multiple ways for me to move, careers where there are different experiences that I can take on and add to my repertoire. And maybe there's an area for me to develop some potential that I haven't developed before, and more possibilities. So I think that thinking about next careers as kaleidoscopic and not telescopic, which is meaning only one other option, is what we're going to have to do much more. So, and maybe if we do that, if we do those moves, I think then the paradigm will shift. And maybe it'll shift to the paradigm of more right places for more right times for more right people. So it's about 5 to the hour. We have a little bit of time for questions. And I'm going to ask you to put any questions you have up on the screen, and I'll answer them, and then try to get back to any ones that I don't answer. And I love some of the comments that came in on my last slide, and that is taking on tasks that are not what I want to do. You're right, might be a way to grow. And I might find I don't want to do them turns into, hey, that wasn't so bad. I do have ability to do that. I like that people are saying that widen the net means widening it for every kind of employee and for the organization. Absolutely, and that came from Linda, and I think you're right on. So questions?
All right. Thank you, Bev, so much. Bev's contact information is on that screen right there. So go ahead, get in touch with her. And then we do have time for about 5-minute Q&A. Attendees, go ahead, shoot those into the chat box. And while we wait for some of those questions to come in, just note that for attending today's session, we're offering a 10% off your next order at hrdqstore.com. So go over there if you have any other questions and check out the store. Let's see. Let me scroll up and see. Our first question is coming from Dave. Do you think that if a manager does not see mobility options for himself, it's even harder for them to have these conversations with employees?
Wow, Dave, I think that is a great question. And the answer I would say is yes, yes, yes. It's why in the work that we do at Career Systems around career development, we often say that we have to do career work with managers before we can help them help their employees. We even say that stuck managers, stuck supervisors, stick people. So if you're feeling stuck yourself, it's very hard for you to co-imagine with an employee what other options might be available.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Next question is coming from Nahid. Can you speak a bit on ways to overcome the obstacles to mobility?
Ways to overcome the obstacles to mobility. I think we have to celebrate and publicize people who have moved in interesting ways other than up. I think we publicize upward moves only, and we forget about publicizing people who have grown in their jobs and we forget to celebrate them. So I'd say one way to shift that perception is to talk more about people who are moving in some of these unique ways. And I think that's critical. And that's a great question.
All right. Yes. Let's see. Next question is coming from Samantha. Why has the career ladder survived for so long in organizations?
You know, I think the basic answer is because our comp systems support that ladder. And I see in a lot of the surveys being done that companies are really working hard to find other systems of reward other than the comp system. And maybe it is, you know, for every new skill or every new, now badging is so popular, every new badge that you get, there's something in it for you. And maybe it's not all about dollars. Maybe the what's in it for you is another chance to have an experience you might not ordinarily have. And, you know, Sarah, I'm looking at the comments and people are saying, thank you for opening my mind to other possibilities. And I just want to thank the Cheryls, the Lindas, you know, for saying that thank you. Open to change up and down or sideways is what's critical. So
yes,
if this short seminar touched that, then I'm a happy camper.
Yes, of course. Yes, thank you so much, Bev. We did have some wonderful questions. Unfortunately, that is all the time we do have for today. So, Bev, would you just like to add any final thoughts before I go ahead and just wrap up then?
Right. I just say talk more, converse more. Tell those of you who listen to this and you manage others, tell them about the session that I just did and what struck you. And tell your own story. I think we are hungry for stories of people who did it differently and who did it the same as my image says. I think the different stories are even more priceless than the ones who say, well, every move I made was a vertical one, because I think that's not true. I think anyone who took a vertical trajectory in an organization, if you really look at it, could never have made every single one vertical. So I think tell your stories would be the most important thing I could say to all of you.
All right, Bev, thank you so much. Thank you so much again. And for everybody on the line, we appreciate your time, and we hope you found today's webinar informative. Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome.